Hello and welcome again to another episode of One Starfish, where our mission is to help change the world one starfish or one person at a time. As always, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, share, all the stuff. That's how we get the word out. I'm excited for our guest today. Doug and we've met a couple times now, but this is the second time kind of meeting. He's helped over 1,000 entrepreneurial companies achieve some success, which is pretty cool. That's a lot of companies. So I'm excited to go into things. Tell us a little bit about, what your mission is and what you're doing with like Lift Enablement. You've got a book out. We'll have all that in the show notes. Tell us a little bit about what your goals are and what you look for.
Yeah, so I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. My parents owned a travel agency way back in the day before the internet and all that fun stuff. And actually, the first real business that I started, I had a small business that I started. I started a DJ company while I was in college. But the first business I actually started was a business with my family working with travel agencies to help them accelerate growth. And so I've always just been fascinated by businesses and the impact that business can have, for good or for bad. I got my parents kind of embedded in me that one person can change the world. And I always found that the entrepreneur, that a business owner was kind of like the leverage point to change, just because the people that they came in contact with, the people that work for them, and all those things. And so the fascination with business and a fascination with what ultimately became sales and the sales process. I always kind of wondered, why did people do what they do? And why are buyers and sellers pursuing the same aim? Right. I mean, the vast majority of sellers, I mean, there are some bad sellers out there, some bad everybody out there. The vast majority of sellers are genuinely trying to help their customers and prospects solve problems. And the people with problems genuinely want their problem solved. So I always wondered, like, okay, these two groups, like, they should be really, like, should be best friends. And they always seem to not quite get along. And so I was fascinated, why is that? And how can we make that better? And if we could make that better, then we can make the business better. And if we can make the business better, we can make the world better. And yeah, that's kind of what's driven me through my journey.
That's awesome. What are some of the trials, I guess, or whatever you want, challenges, stepping stones, whatever you want to call it, you've had to overcome to get where you're at?
Every now and then I feel like posting on all of the socials, this is hard, right? And when I work with organizations on their growth efforts and their sales efforts, one of the things I always like to talk about is the mythology of lead generation and the mythology of the sales process. We kind of have this picture that I'm going to come out with a great idea. It's going to generate a lead. I'm going to turn that lead over to my salesperson, who's going to instantaneously reach out. The salesperson is going to be greeted with great enthusiasm, brought in. We'll be able to meet all the right people. We'll put a wonderful proposal together, and a decision will be made. Right? We have this, like, it's super smooth, it's super great, and there's this aspect of, we feel like it's supposed to be easy. And even though we realize, when I talk about it like I just did, that it's not like that. It's never like that. Of course, it's not like that. We still feel like that's how it's supposed to be. And so just really understanding how hard it is. I mean, one of the things I love about entrepreneurs is at my company, when we have an all hands, we start with someone reading the poem Man in the Arena. Right. And so we talk a lot about being in the arena and just being in the arena, and, dirt and blood and sweat and tears. Like, to be there, it's so easy to be on the sidelines. It's so easy to be saying, this is how it should be done. To put yourself in that position where you're making a call and taking action and living with those consequences, that's hard. And then the world is constantly pulling you in directions outside of what you should be doing. Right? One of the stories I talk about, actually open up the book with a story of me being in the parking lot in Phoenix, Arizona of McDonald's, as I was calling back to my parents and my brother with my, quarter pounder and cheese on, on the passenger seat as I was trying to wolf down some lunch. And I literally started crying because it wasn't working. Um, we were having great conversations. Everyone was saying, "Oh wow, this sounds great." You know what? The timing's just not right. But no, this is definitely something we want to do. It kind of
in
like,
the future.
and my favorite was always like, "Wow, Doug, you're one of the best salespeople I've ever met." I mean, like your presentation was just great. Um, we just don't feel like this is the right thing for us right now. And I'm like, well, wait a second. You
Not
just
very good
told me that I was
salesman
like,
then.
right. That's exactly right. I'm like, you just told me I was the best salesperson that you've ever met. And I mean, call me silly, but I always thought that like salesperson's job was to get a sale. So like, how can we make those two things work?
You were the best presenter.
Yeah. Or, yeah. and so one, so we realized, this was like in the beginning of what was going to be a 2-week trip. I loved Phoenix, Arizona. My best friend from high school was, had moved out there because he went to college at Arizona State. I was like, I was going to have fun and close business. What more could you ask for? And we're like, you know what? We got to rethink this thing. And so we cut the ship short, moved my flight up. I flew back home, went into the office on the weekend. We started pulling out a bunch of flip charts back in the day. Like we didn't even have whiteboards yet, right? We pulled out a bunch of flip charts and we're like, okay, what did we think we were doing? Why are we doing? What's happening? And what we realized, we had identified what we thought was a real flaw in how a segment of the market served travel agencies. And so we thought the problem that needed to be solved was different than how others were defining the problem. And therefore, our solution and our approach was different. But when we looked at what we were doing, everything we were doing fit right into how all of the competitors did. And so we were out there saying, we're different, but we're going to look, feel, and act like everybody else. Right. And on one hand, it's like, how can you fall into that trap? But on the other hand, it looks so intuitive. It's working for them. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I really came to understand just kind of a core philosophy that I've always lived by. And actually, in the first years of my business, of this iteration of the business, the first step of our process, I actually called it this. Like we called it define your game, but it was play your game. And so like, what's the hardest thing that I deal with it to this day is how do I play my game? When you add social media and the noise and all the connectedness, there's 1,000 people telling you what to do. Everyone looks like they're having massive success. You're dealing with all that, and just being able, to be open to change, to make adjustments, but still to understand what's core to who you are, what's core to what your business is, and how can you play your game. That's, I think that's both the core to the success that I've had, but it's also, a struggle every single day.
So curious, you had all these people that are like, you're great, but not buying anything. How long did it take you to finally figure this out and start to build traction? If you remember, how many years, I'm guessing years, did it really take to start to just to like listen, people that are listening, they're new entrepreneurs. And I love that you started out and said this is hard because I think a lot of people come in and they see the flashy cars and the jets and all the things. And they're like, oh my gosh, I want to be an entrepreneur. This sounds amazing, which it is amazing. I could never be an employee either. However, it does take more work than I think most people think because they think they could work 2 to 3 hours a day and make millions if they even have to work 2 to 3 hours a day. So like, how long until you started to actually gain traction? Do you remember?
So the good news is actually in that particular instance, we made change. Like that weekend, we said, you know what? We're throwing everything out. And we're going to start implementing what makes sense to us. We're going to start playing our game. And, one of the big differences that we made is we started focusing on teaching the problem. And this has become somewhat of a, I think someone wrote a sales book called Sell the Problem. But this was even before that was a common thing. And what we found was if we could change how someone thought about the problem, then the actions beyond that would change as well. So we started to see results pretty fast. The good news was we had some advantage going into the market. My parents had been well known in the travel industry. My dad had been a past president of the American Society of Travel Agents. They did consulting, so we were known in the industry. Um, but what I would say is what you're looking at in in any effort, you've got to embark with a plan. And I don't care how much money you throw at the problem. I don't care how much money you raise, or if you're, self-funded and you're working your own thing. It's pretty much, there's not a whole lot of difference. It's going to take 12 to 18 months of consistent effort and again, this is also why you got to play your own game, because you get into, you're 6 months in, and by the way, you're going to see everything that's not working before you see what's working. You're going to get the resistors and the people who are telling you you're doing it wrong before you get the people who jump on board and become your fans. And again, you have to be flexible. You can't just go, I'm not going to listen to the market, but you've got to stay core to that. And if you change, like if you just go, wait, no, I'm going to do this instead, you basically are re-triggering that 12 to 18 month clock. But I would say in my experience, both for me and with the organizations that I work with, is if you can put 12 to 18 months into a solid process and you stay at it, that's when you'll start to really see the results tick up. And it feels a little bit overnightish, because it's kind of like nothing. Wait, where did all that come from? Right. I think about the movie Shawshank Redemption when I talk about this. Andy Dubane at the end had to crawl through a half a mile of sewage, right, to get to freedom. And I think this is what Shawshank is about. We all have our own Shawshanks, right? We're in Shawshank, and we've got our vision of freedom, of luxury, and so we go in, we get that first part of sewage. So we don't go through a half a mile of sewage. We go through 100 feet of sewage and go, okay, no, this has to be the wrong thing, right? It's hard. This should be easier. So then we jump into it. And what ends up happening is we end up going through tens of miles of sewage just in a whole bunch of different pipes, and we never get to that other end. So I think it's like, what is your Shawshank? What is your, what's your proverbial beach? What is that why? I think that's why really understanding your why, which connects to what your game is so important to be able to navigate that.
That's so good. Yes, go through the hard stuff first. So that's important. And we say play your own game. Tell us a little bit more what that means to you, and so other people can kind of follow it, because I know it's a big thing for you, and I love it.
Yep. So I talk about this in the book as well. When we're going to market, and let's think about this. Why is selling so hard? One of the reasons it's hard is because we get in our own way. Think about this. As a salesperson, you do something. And by the way, I say as a salesperson, whether your title is salesperson or you're leading an organization or whatever the case may be, right? But you do something, or your company does something that solves a problem that's important to someone. And if somebody has that problem, and it's important to them, that problem is causing them pain. And so inherently, if someone has a problem that is important, that is causing them pain, they naturally want to get rid of that problem. The difficulty is they don't really understand what's causing that problem. They don't really understand the problem. So when, a core part of defining your game is to say, what is the problem that we solve? But, Simon Sinek, one of his famous phrases is start with why. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And I think the why gets really confused in how it gets translated into business activities. Mm-hmm. There is our personal why. There's the why am I doing this? Like when, we started off this conversation, and I said, well, my parents embedded in me that I could change the world. Here's the thing. The only person that really cares about that is me, right? No one's going, oh, wait, hey, I'm going to buy from Lyft because, right? The why for Lyft is, what is the problem that we solve? And so right off the bat, that's the first part of defining your game, right? Your problem and how you define the problem should be different than how others are defining the problem. If you think about the way people respond, if you name the problem, that's the problem that someone's going to solve. Right. So how are we perceiving the problem? How do we understand the problem? That's kind of that first piece. The second piece is who are you as an organization? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? This is another one of my favorite observations. We all like to talk about, or most people like to talk about, the idea of operating from our strengths. Really common term is we're a strength-based culture. And I love that. Right. But one of the things that I always explain, and when I'm interviewing employees, I always say, look, we're a strength-based culture, but what that also means is we're a weakness-based culture. Right. There are no strengths without weaknesses. Mm-hmm. Right? And so, like, one of my favorite interview questions, by the way, is I call it the pre-forgiveness question. Tell me all the reasons that you're going to frustrate us. Right? If we were to hire you, tell me all the reasons right now. Why will we be frustrated with you? And here's my promise. If it is on the list that you share with me before you start working here, right, then you are pre-forgiven. That will never be held against you because we knew it going into it, right? It's a lot better than saying, well, so tell me what are your weaknesses? And they go, well, I care too much. I work too hard.
Right. You're like,
sometimes people complain that I get work done too fast. That was my favorite answer to the weakness question. I'm like, I would like to meet those people. Sorry.
Yeah, I digress.
and so understanding what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, right? Mm-hmm. I love doing podcast episodes. I love having conversations like this. This is one of my strengths. Give me this. I'll do this every day. I can do this for hours in a day. There are other people, they don't like doing this. This is not what they're comfortable with, right? That's totally fine. There's a lot of different ways to go about. I personally don't like, I'm active on social media, but I'm not crazy active on social media. Why? I just can't do that. There's an element in terms of how it plays that just doesn't work for me. I mean, there are days where I go, you know what I need to do is I just need to commit to posting on LinkedIn 3 times a day. I need to do that for 12 to 18 months. Right. And I just need to do that, right? Because here's this person who's telling me that they're doing it and they're getting 2.2 million impressions. And, one of the things and why that 1,000 companies that I've worked with, I think is so meaningful is when I talk about 1,000 companies I work with, I mean, I've seen their numbers. I've seen their internal books. I've been able to see there's the story that people tell and there's what really happens. So again, in that define your game and play your game, where are the places that play to your strengths? What are the things that you can do on an ongoing basis? Orient your game there, and then identify. I think this was called the 20-mile march. We have a tendency, people who become entrepreneurs have a performance gene in them, and one of the difficulties, I know it's something that I deal with all the time, is there's always one more thing I could do today. So, like, on one hand, I want to be an entrepreneur, be my own boss because I can only work, then I only have to work 2 to 3 hours a day. But then there's also that, wait, I could have done one more thing. I could have done this. I could have done this. Right. And so there's an aspect of you never get to where you want to be. Right. Mm-hmm. that growth aspect, what you're aspiring to is always moving forward. Mm-hmm. But if you identify what are the core things that I'm going to do, and I'm going to do them every day, every week, every month, whatever the case may be. And I might not do anything else. I might be having a bad month, but if nothing else, I'm going to do this. So, like, as an example, I started walking regularly about 7 years ago now. I have done at least one 15-minute walk, 15-minute exertion walk every day for the last 2,932 days. right? I know that because my watch tells me. Um, and and it's like, you know what? There are days where that's about all I did was a 15-minute walk. But every day I do that walk. And just as an example, my average steps now are about 8,000. Before I started doing that, my average steps were probably about 3,000.
That's cool. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so just by saying, okay, what are those core elements? What are the things that I'm going to do? They're my targets. And by the way, it used to be I was always great at coming up with a reason. You know what? I know I should exercise. I know I should get out and take a walk, but this, and this. And, it was probably about 10, 11 months of my streak in doing that suddenly, like, I was in a hotel. I had it because I was doing an offsite. I had, it had been a crazy day. It was 11:15 at night. And I was like, wait, I haven't done my walk. I literally jogged back and forth in my hotel room for 15 minutes.
Nice.
Because it went from being, I could always find the reason not to do it, that I always found the reason to do it. And so, that's what we call a habit. And so as you start to identify those things and you're going, and I don't walk to walk, I walk because I realize, hey, I need the energy and everything else that comes for it. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, like, those are all some of the key elements, I think, that really go into defining your game. They let you play what you're doing. And, I know it's trite, but the only people we're competing with is ourselves. Mm-hmm. Right. Someone else's success is not my failure. And I'm a competitive person, so that's sometimes very hard for me to remember. But those are the things that I think lead to the consistency. And by the way, one of the things that if I could go back and tell my younger self one thing that I wish I could have understood a whole lot earlier than I did, is consistency beats top performance. Like, big jumps, outstanding plays. I used to coach baseball, and what I tried to teach my team was, hey, you know what? If you make a big play, that's awesome. But here's all I want. I want you to make routine plays routine. If you can just make the routine plays routine, we're going to be okay. By the way, the big plays will take care of themselves. And I think that applies to so many things that we do.
So good. I love that. That's so good. I always ask 3 final questions when I wrap up, and then anything we didn't touch on that you think would be really impactful for our listeners. So, and I'm sure people got a lot of value out of this. I just want to unpack really quick before you get into those. The last little bit, like, play your own game. You're competing against yourself, and be consistent. Play your own game, competing against yourself, be consistent. All right. First and final question is, if someone's looking for their purpose, what's one sentence that you could say that could help them find it?
What gives you energy?
That's a good one. I love that. Second question is, what's a favorite quote and why?
George Bernard Shaw once said, some people ask why. I ask why not.
Good.
I'm sorry, look at what is and ask why. I look at what is and ask why not. It was a John F. Kennedy quote. When I heard it, I was like, yeah, why not? And the name of our company used to be Imagine, and that's why we were Imagine. That was the basis of that, is imagine what could be rather than just dealing with what is.
That's good. And third and final question, what's one word or sentence you want on your gravestone?
He put it all out. The tank is empty.
Yeah, good. All right, you run into someone in a coffee shop, they're like, hey, Doug, learning about consistency, playing your own game, like looking at what the differences are, all of that stuff. What's something we didn't touch on that you think would be really impactful for our listeners?
So one of my favorite sayings, and if you and I hung out together a lot, you would get sick and tired of hearing me say this, is the juice worth the squeeze? Make the juice worth the squeeze. And I think that, this is one of the reasons why I love working with entrepreneurs, is I almost never see a situation where the effort's not there. They oftentimes feel like it's the effort that's not there. Mm-hmm. It's the recipe, it's the order. And by the way, you learn this in any performance discipline. If you're trying too hard, you get in the way of your performance. If you're going too fast, it's one of my favorite things when I'm watching some sport and someone's struggling. You'll hear the announcer say the game's moving really fast for them. They need to slow the game down, right? And that if I were to say to that same coffee shop person, what's the book about? The book's about how do you create the structure so that you can generate the momentum to get more juice for the squeeze. How can I do a little bit less? Right. Do less with more. We obsess about doing more with less, but it's actually the opposite. Do less. Do less. That'll give you more that you can do with that. That will enable you to excel. You'll learn. And that, I guess that's the other thing that I would say we didn't really get into. I know I had a good year when I look back at what I was doing in a year earlier and I go, who was that for? Like, oh my God. I love looking at some of the stuff I used to do and I go, someone actually bought from us on that. Oh my God, that was horrible. And that just tells me that I've learned a lot. And I think if you show me the rate of learning, I'll show you the rate of growth, both personally, professionally, and economically.
I love that. Show the rate of learning to show the rate of growth. How much are you learning?
Yep.
How fast are you failing forward?
Yep.
Yeah, really good. I love that. We'll have all of Doug's information and his book, all that stuff in the show notes, guys. Feel free to reach out. You could tell this guy is super approachable. If you want to reach out to him or reach out to his team or check out his book, definitely recommend that to have less, to do less, to achieve more. I like that one too. That was a good one.
It's so hard. Every time I say it, I still feel like I'm getting it wrong. Yeah, it's
That's so good. Thank you so much for being on. Guys, let's go out there. Let's change the world one starfish or one person at a time. If we can change one life at a time together, we can change the world. Thanks for being on, Doug.
Thank you.